It was a damp Tuesday morning, the kind of day where the gray clouds seemed to stretch endlessly, casting a melancholic shadow over the small town. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt, and the soft pitter-patter of droplets against the diner windows served as a constant background rhythm. Clara wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, her hands moving automatically while her mind drifted elsewhere. Life had been a series of monotonous days, each blending into the next, marked only by the relentless grind of double shifts and the faint hope of a better tomorrow. The diner itself was a reflection of the town, quaint, unassuming, and worn around the edges. The vinyl booths were cracked from years of use, and the faded checkered floor bore the marks of countless hurried footsteps. Despite its imperfections, the diner had a charm that kept regulars coming back. For Clara, it was both a lifeline and a cage. Clara had been working at the diner for nearly a decade, ever since she moved back to her hometown after her husband's unexpected passing. The loss had been a seismic event, leaving her alone to care for their then-infant son, Max. Over time, Clara had learned to mask her grief with a determined smile, but the weight of her circumstances never fully lifted. Every cup of coffee poured and every plate served was a step toward survival, yet it often felt like she was running in place. The morning rush was just winding down when the bell above the door jingled softly. Clara glanced up instinctively, her practiced eye scanning the new arrival. A young man entered, tall and unassuming, with a quiet air of composure. He looked out of place, not in the ostentatious way of someone flaunting wealth, but in the subtle way of someone accustomed to a different pace of life. He wore a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, and his face was partially obscured by the hood he'd pulled up against the rain. Clara's curiosity was piqued, but she didn't dwell on it. The diner attracted all sorts, from weary travelers to locals looking for comfort food. She grabbed a menu and approached his table. "Good morning," she said warmly, setting the menu down. "What can I get started for you?" The man looked up, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was a depth to his gaze that caught her off guard, something thoughtful and measured. "Coffee, please," he replied, his voice soft but clear. "And maybe a recommendation? I'm not from around here." Clara smiled, gesturing toward the menu. "Well, if you're hungry, our pancakes are a crowd favorite. But if you're looking for something lighter, the oatmeal's pretty good too." He nodded thoughtfully. "I'll go with the pancakes, then. And some scrambled eggs." "Coming right up." As she moved to place the order, Clara couldn't help but steal another glance at him. There was something familiar about his demeanor, though she couldn't quite place it. She dismissed the thought and focused on her tasks. The man's presence didn't go unnoticed by the regulars. A few whispered speculations began to ripple through the diner. Some thought he might be a writer or an artist, seeking inspiration in the quiet charm of their town. Others joked that he was probably lost and stumbled into the diner by accident. Clara paid little attention to the chatter, she had enough on her plate without indulging in idle gossip. When the food was ready, she brought it over, balancing the plates with practiced ease. "Here you go," she said, setting them down. "Enjoy." "Thank you," he said, offering her a polite smile. For the next hour, the man quietly ate his meal, occasionally glancing out the window at the rain-soaked street. Clara found herself strangely attuned to his presence, though she couldn't explain why. He wasn't demanding or particularly talkative, but there was an air of calm around him that stood out amidst the usual clatter of the diner. As the lunch crowd began to trickle in, Clara became busier, juggling orders and refills with her usual efficiency. She almost forgot about the man until she noticed him standing at the counter, ready to pay. "Did you enjoy everything?" she asked, ringing up his total. "It was great," he replied, pulling out his wallet. "Thank you for the recommendation." Clara handed him his change and receipt, then returned to clearing tables. It wasn't until he'd left that she noticed the folded note tucked beneath the edge of his plate. Curious, she picked it up, assuming it was a comment about the service or a thank you. Unfolding the note, Clara froze. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, and the words seemed to leap off the page. Clara, your kindness and hard work do not go unnoticed. In a world that often takes people like you for granted, know that you are seen and appreciated. Please accept this small token as a gesture of gratitude. You deserve more than you realize. Beneath the note was a crisp, folded check. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she read the amount. It wasn't just generous, it was life-changing. $5,000. Her hands trembled, and she sank into the nearest booth, overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. Gratitude, disbelief, and a deep, aching vulnerability washed over her. Who was this man? And why would he do something like this for her? The sound of the diner faded into the background as Clara sat there, the note and check clutched tightly in her hands. Around her, the world moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened, but for Clara, everything had shifted. It wasn't just the money, it was the acknowledgement, the validation that her struggles hadn't gone unnoticed. In that moment, she felt a glimmer of hope she hadn't experienced in years. As the rain continued to fall outside, Clara looked out the window, her mind racing with questions. Who was this stranger, and what had compelled him to show such kindness? And most importantly, what would she do with this unexpected gift? The answers, she knew, would change her life forever. Clara spent the rest of her shift in a daze. The folded check and note were safely tucked into the pocket of her apron, yet the weight of them seemed to press on her every thought. Each time she refilled a coffee cup or delivered a plate of food, her mind replayed the morning's events like a film on repeat. She wondered if she had imagined the entire thing. But no, every time her hand brushed against the pocket, the smooth edge of the paper reminded her it was real. By the time her shift ended, the rain had eased into a misty drizzle. Clara stepped outside into the damp air, her breath visible in the cool evening as she clutched her coat tightly. The walk home felt longer than usual, her thoughts spiraling into endless questions. Who was this man? Why had he singled her out? What had she done to deserve such generosity? Max was already at home, looked after by her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Grayson, who had been a godsend since Clara's husband passed away. As Clara walked through the door, the smell of macaroni and cheese greeted her, a simple comfort food that Max adored. "Mom!" Max called out, running to hug her. At 8 years old, he was the spitting image of his father, with a mop of dark hair and a mischievous smile that could brighten even Clara's darkest days. "How was school, buddy?" Clara asked, setting her bag down and ruffling his hair. "Good. I got a gold star on my math test," he exclaimed proudly. "That's amazing," Clara said, pulling him into another hug. Mrs. Grayson appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "He's been a little angel, as always," she said with a warm smile. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Grayson." "I don't know what I'd do without you," Clara said, meaning every word. After Mrs. Grayson left, Clara and Max sat down to eat. She tried to focus on their conversation, but her mind kept drifting to the note and the check. After Max was tucked into bed, she finally allowed herself to pull out the folded paper and read it again. The words were as striking as the first time she'd seen them, and her heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Clara wasn't sure what to do next. Part of her wanted to keep the money untouched, afraid that spending it might somehow diminish its meaning. Another part of her, the pragmatic part, was already thinking about overdue bills and the repairs her aging car desperately needed. Yet, beyond the financial relief, there was something deeper gnawing at her, the mystery of the man who had left the note. The next day, Clara returned to the diner, hoping for answers. She scanned every face that walked through the door, her heart leaping slightly each time the bell jingled. But the man didn't return. As the hours dragged on, Clara began to wonder if she'd ever see him again. By mid-afternoon, the lunch rush had slowed, and Clara found herself wiping down the counter absent-mindedly. That's when she noticed a sleek black car pulling into the parking lot. The vehicle stood out sharply against the battered trucks and sedans that usually filled the lot. Her pulse quickened as the car door opened and the man from the day before stepped out. He entered the diner with the same quiet composure, his hood down this time, revealing a face that was striking in its youthfulness yet marked by a certain seriousness. Clara approached him cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. "Welcome back," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thank you," he replied, offering a faint smile. "I hope it's not too busy for a quick conversation." Clara blinked, surprised. "Of course not. Would you like to sit at the counter?" He nodded, and she led him to a stool. As he settled in, Clara couldn't help but notice the curious glances from the other customers. The man's presence had a way of drawing attention, though he seemed entirely unaware of it. "I wanted to thank you," Clara began, her voice wavering slightly. For everything. The note, the generosity, it means more than I can say." The man shook his head. "No thanks are necessary. You earned it." Clara furrowed her brow. "I don't understand." "Why me? I'm just a waitress. There are so many people out there who—" He held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "You're not just anything. Yesterday, I watched you work tirelessly, treating every customer with kindness and respect, even when they didn't deserve it. You reminded me of someone who was important to me. Someone who believed in the value of hard work and compassion." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Clara didn't know how to respond. "I don't usually do this," he continued, his voice lowering slightly. "But Summit. Hing about you, it felt right. Like I was supposed to be here at this moment, in this place." Clara's chest tightened. There was a sincerity in his tone that made her believe him completely, even though his explanation only deepened the mystery. "What's your name?" she asked, her curiosity finally getting the better of her. He hesitated for a moment before replying, "Daniel." It wasn't much, but it was something. Clara wanted to press further, to ask about the car, the note, and the reason he'd chosen her. But before she could, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I didn't want to overwhelm you yesterday," he said, sliding the envelope across the counter. "But I think this might help answer some of your questions." Clara stared at the envelope, her heart racing. Slowly, she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten in the same neat script as the note from the day before. The letter began with an apology for intruding into her life so abruptly, and went on to explain that Daniel had recently inherited a significant sum of money from a relative who had always believed in giving back to those in need. Daniel had decided to use the inheritance to help people who embodied the values his relative had cherished: kindness, resilience, and integrity. The letter ended with an invitation. Daniel wanted to sponsor Clara for a personal development program, a 6-month course designed to help people achieve their dreams, whether that meant starting a business, pursuing an education, or something else entirely. Clara's hands trembled as she finished reading. The offer was almost too much to comprehend. She looked up at Daniel, who was watching her with a calm yet expectant expression. "Why me?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Because you deserve it," he said simply. For the first time in years, Clara felt a flicker of something she had almost forgotten: hope. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. As she stood there, clutching the letter, she realized that her life might never be the same again. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. Clara spent the next few days in a whirlwind of emotions, her thoughts dominated by Daniel's extraordinary gesture and the opportunities it seemed to promise. She found herself oscillating between excitement and fear. The idea of stepping out of her comfort zone, of reaching for something more, was thrilling, but it was also daunting. For so long, Clara's life had been about survival. Dreaming felt foreign, almost indulgent. She reread the letter from Daniel countless times, committing his words to memory. Each line carried a weight that was both empowering and overwhelming. What did it mean to deserve such kindness? Could she truly live up to the faith he had placed in her? Max, of course, noticed the change in his mother. Children had an uncanny ability to sense the unspoken, and Max was no exception. One evening, as they sat on the worn couch in their tiny living room, he looked up from his drawing pad and asked, "Mom, why are you smiling so much lately?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much to share. Max was still so young, and she didn't want to burden him with adult worries, or hopes that might not come to fruition. But she also didn't want to hide the truth from him. "Something good happened at work," she said, keeping her tone light. "A nice man gave me a note that made me feel really special." Max tilted his head, his brow furrowing in curiosity. "Like a thank you note?" "Something like that," Clara replied, ruffling his hair. "It reminded me that there are kind people in the world, and that maybe we can dream bigger than we thought." Max seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to his drawing with the carefree focus only children possessed. Clara watched him for a moment, her heart swelling with love and determination. Whatever came next, she knew she had to try, for Max, if not for herself. The next time Daniel came to the diner, Clara was ready. She had spent hours rehearsing what she would say, her thoughts filled with questions and gratitude. When the bell above the door jingled and Daniel stepped inside, she felt a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. He took his usual seat at the counter, offering her a polite nod as she approached. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady despite the flurry of emotions beneath the surface. "Good morning," Daniel replied, his expression calm but attentive. "How are you?" "I'm overwhelmed," Clara admitted with a small laugh. "But in a good way. I've been thinking a lot about your offer." Daniel nodded, as if he had expected this. "Take all the time you need," he said. "This is your journey, not mine." Clara appreciated his patience, but she knew she couldn't let fear hold her back. She took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I want to say yes. To the program, to the opportunity, to everything. I don't know where it will lead, but I'm ready to find out." For the first time, Daniel's composed demeanor cracked, revealing a genuine smile that lit up his face. "That's wonderful to hear," he said. "You won't regret this, Clara. I promise." The next steps happened quickly. Within a week, Clara was enrolled in the program Daniel had recommended, a comprehensive personal development course that blended practical skills with emotional growth. The sessions were held online, which allowed Clara to balance her coursework with her job at the diner and her responsibilities as a mother. At first, Clara felt out of place among the other participants. Many of them seemed more polished, more confident, people who had already tasted success and were looking to refine it. Clara, by contrast, felt like an outsider, a woman who had spent years scraping by and had forgotten how to dream. But as the weeks went on, something began to shift. The program encouraged Clara to confront her fears and limitations, to see them not as barriers but as stepping stones. She learned about goal setting, time management, and self-care, concepts that felt revolutionary in their simplicity. For the first time, Clara started to believe that she could create a better life for herself and Max. The program also required participants to design a passion project, a venture that aligned with their values and aspirations. Clara spent days brainstorming, trying to figure out what she was truly passionate about. Her mind kept returning to the diner, not because it was her dream job, but because of what it represented, a place where people came together, where strangers became friends, and where small acts of kindness could brighten someone's day. One evening, as she tucked Max into bed, the idea came to her like a bolt of lightning. What if she created a community space that combined the warmth of a diner with resources for people in need? A place where someone could grab a hot meal, take a free workshop, or simply find a listening ear? The idea filled Clara with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She began sketching out her vision, staying up late into the night to research community grants and nonprofit organizations. Her passion project quickly became more than just an assignment, it became a mission. As Clara's confidence grew, so did her connection with Daniel. They began meeting outside of the diner, discussing her progress and sharing stories about their lives. Clara learned that Daniel had his own reasons for wanting to help others, reasons rooted in loss and redemption. While he rarely spoke about his past, the glimpses he shared only deepened Clara's respect for him. The community space project gained momentum faster than Clara could have imagined. With Daniel's support, she secured funding from a local charity and found a vacant building that could be renovated into a welcoming hub. Volunteers from the town pitched in, drawn by Clara's passion and the promise of something meaningful. As the opening day approached, Clara found herself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. The woman who had once felt trapped by her circumstances was now a leader, a dreamer, and a doer. She had faced her fears and discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. On the morning of the grand opening, Clara stood outside the newly renovated building, her heart pounding with excitement. The sign above the door read, "The Haven, a place to connect, share, and grow." Max was by her side, beaming with pride. "You did it, Mom," he said, his voice filled with awe. "No, we did it," Clara replied, pulling him into a hug. As the first visitors began to arrive, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought of Daniel, whose kindness had set everything into motion. She thought of her neighbors and friends, who had rallied around her vision. And she thought of herself, the woman who had dared to believe in something more. The Haven became a beacon of hope for the town, a place where lives were changed and dreams were nurtured. And though Clara knew there would still be challenges ahead, she also knew she was ready to face them. Because now, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. The opening of the Haven marked the beginning of a new chapter not just for Clara, but for the entire community. Word spread quickly about the space, drawing in a diverse crowd of visitors, families struggling to make ends meet, individuals looking for a fresh start, and even those simply curious about this new gathering place in town. Clara threw herself into the work with a passion she hadn't known she possessed. She greeted every visitor with a warm smile, eager to share the story behind the Haven and its mission. Her days were filled with an endless stream of tasks, organizing free workshops, coordinating volunteers, and ensuring that every meal served was hearty and comforting. Despite the long hours, Clara found herself energized by the sense of purpose that now defined her life. Max often joined her after school, quickly becoming a favorite among the regulars. His infectious energy and boundless curiosity brought a sense of lightness to the Haven, reminding everyone of the importance of joy even in the face of adversity. Clara watched him with pride, knowing that she was building a foundation not only for herself but also for her son's future. But as with any new venture, challenges soon emerged. While the initial wave of enthusiasm had drawn in plenty of visitors, sustaining the Haven required more than just goodwill. Clara began to notice gaps in funding as donations from the initial launch dwindled. She spent sleepless nights poring over budgets, searching for ways to stretch every dollar. The pressure was immense, and for the first time since the Haven's inception, doubt began to creep back into Clara's mind. One particularly difficult evening, Clara found herself alone in the quiet building, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the otherwise silent space. She sat at a worn wooden table, staring at the stack of unpaid invoices before her. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she wondered if she had bitten off more than she could chew. A gentle knock at the door startled her. Wiping her eyes quickly, Clara called out, "We're closed for the night." The door creaked open anyway, and Daniel stepped inside, his familiar calm presence immediately filling the room. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his gaze softening as he noticed the stress etched on her face. Clara offered a weak smile. I didn't realize saving the world came with so much paperwork. Daniel chuckled, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. No one ever said it would be easy. But then again, nothing worth doing ever is. His words were comforting, but they didn't solve the very real problems Clara was facing. She let out a heavy sigh. I don't know if I can keep this going. The funding isn't enough, and I feel like I'm constantly putting out fires. What if I fail, Daniel? What if all of this was for nothing? Daniel leaned forward, his expression earnest. Clara, failure isn't the opposite of success, it's a part of it. You've already done something extraordinary by creating this space. The challenges you're facing now don't diminish that. They're just the next step in the journey. Clara nodded, though her doubts remained. But how do I keep going when it feels like the odds are stacked against me? By remembering why you started, Daniel said simply. And by letting others help you. The last part struck a chord. Clara realized she had been trying to shoulder the weight of the Haven's success on her own, unwilling to ask for help for fear of appearing weak. But perhaps Daniel was right. Perhaps leaning on others wasn't a sign of failure, but of strength. Over the next few weeks, Clara began reaching out to the community for support. She organized a town hall meeting at the Haven, inviting residents to come and share their ideas. To her surprise, the response was overwhelming. Dozens of people showed up, eager to contribute in any way they could. One man offered to teach free carpentry classes, while a retired teacher volunteered to run a literacy program. Local farmers donated fresh produce, and a group of musicians organized a benefit concert to raise funds. Clara was moved to tears by the outpouring of generosity, realizing that the Haven had become more than just her dream, it was now a shared vision for the entire community. As the months went on, the Haven began to thrive in ways Clara hadn't imagined. It became a hub for connection and growth, a place where people could learn new skills, find support, and build friendships. Clara's passion project had evolved into a living, breathing testament to the power of community and resilience. One day, as Clara was setting up for a workshop on financial literacy, a familiar face walked through the door. It was Mrs. Grayson, her elderly neighbor who had been such a source of support during Clara's toughest times. Mrs. Grayson. What brings you here? Clara asked, delighted to see her. Mrs. Grayson smiled warmly. I heard you were starting a community garden out back, and I thought you might need a green thumb to help. Clara laughed, feeling a rush of gratitude. We could definitely use your expertise. The community garden quickly became one of the Haven's most popular initiatives, bringing people together to grow fresh fruits and vegetables. For many, it was more than just a source of food, it was a symbol of hope and renewal. As the Haven continued to flourish, Clara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about the long hours at the diner, the unexpected note from Daniel, and the leap of faith that had changed everything. She realized that every challenge, every moment of doubt, had been a necessary part of the path she was on. One evening, as the sun set over the garden, Clara stood with Max, watching as volunteers tended to the rows of plants. Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with pride. "Mom, do you think Dad would have liked this place?" he asked softly. Clara felt a lump form in her throat but managed to nod. "I think he would have loved it. And I think he'd be so proud of you, for being such a big part of making it happen." Max grinned, his face lighting up in a way that reminded Clara of the endless possibilities ahead. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the Haven became more than just a space, it became a legacy. Clara knew there would always be challenges, but she also knew she had the strength and support to face them. Through it all, she held on to the lesson that had started it all, that kindness, resilience, and a willingness to dream could change not only a single life but an entire community. And for that, she would always be grateful. As the years passed, the Haven became more than just a beloved community center, it evolved into a symbol of hope and resilience for the entire town. People traveled from nearby cities to see it, drawn by stories of its transformative impact. Journalists and researchers visited to document its success, marveling at how a small-town initiative had grown into a beacon of unity and progress. Clara, now recognized as a local leader, often found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. But life, as it often does, had more challenges in store. One winter morning, Clara arrived at the Haven to find the building unusually cold. The furnace, which had been patched up numerous times over the years, had finally given out. Clara frowned, realizing that replacing it would be costly. With a tight budget already stretched thin, this was an expense they couldn't afford at the moment. She made a note to look into grants or donations, but deep down, she knew it would take more than just goodwill to cover the cost. To complicate matters, a storm was forecasted to hit the region later that week, and the Haven was scheduled to host a crucial town meeting about expanding its services. The idea of canceling the meeting weighed heavily on Clara, knowing how important it was to the community. She decided to push forward, determined to find a way. Meanwhile, Max, now a teenager, had grown into a thoughtful and resourceful young man. He was as passionate about the Haven as Clara, often brainstorming ways to improve its outreach. When he learned about the furnace issue, he rallied his friends and proposed an idea: a winter festival fundraiser. The project became a unifying force for the town. Local businesses donated materials, carpenters offered their expertise, and parents organized fundraisers to cover additional costs. Max took on the role of project ambassador, speaking to his classmates about the importance of community and even helping to paint signs for the playground. The construction process wasn't without its challenges. Unexpected delays and a few budget shortfalls tested everyone's patience, but Clara's determination never wavered. She leaned on Daniel for guidance, who reminded her that setbacks were simply part of the journey. His steady presence continued to be a source of strength for Clara, and their bond deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. Finally, after months of hard work, the playground was ready. On the day of the grand opening, the Haven buzzed with excitement. Families gathered in the garden, children tugging at their parents' hands as they waited for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Max stood proudly by Clara's side, holding a pair of oversized scissors. When the ribbon was cut, the crowd erupted into cheers, and the children raced onto the playground. Their laughter filled the air, a sound that seemed to echo with joy and possibility. Clara watched them with tears in her eyes, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just a playground, it was a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together with a shared purpose. As the event continued, Clara found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that fateful day at the diner. She thought about the risks she had taken, the doubts she had faced, and the support she had received along the way. Most of all, she thought about how far she had come, from a woman simply trying to get by to someone who had built something lasting and meaningful. Later that evening, after the festivities had ended and the Haven had grown quiet, Clara sat on one of the benches by the playground. The soft glow of the streetlights illuminated the empty swings, swaying gently in the breeze. Max sat beside her, leaning his head on her shoulder. "You did good, Mom," he said softly. "Really good." Clara wrapped an arm around him, her heart full. "We did good, Max, together." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. She knew there would always be challenges ahead, life had taught her that much. But she also knew she had the resilience, the community, and the love to face whatever came next. The Haven wasn't just a place, it was a testament to the power of kindness, perseverance, and dreams. And as Clara sat there with Max, she realized that this journey, with all its ups and downs, was just the beginning. "We can set it up in the garden," Max explained to Clara, his excitement infectious. "Games, food, music, it'll be fun and raise money for the furnace." Clara smiled at his enthusiasm but hesitated. "It's a wonderful idea, Max, but we'd have to pull it off in just a few days. That's not a lot of time. Max grinned. We've faced bigger challenges, Mom. We can do this. Taking inspiration from Max's unwavering confidence, Clara agreed. They quickly spread the word, and the community once again came together to make the festival happen. Volunteers braved the cold to string lights, set up booths, and prepare food. Local musicians offered to perform for free, and businesses donated prizes for games and raffles. Despite the frigid temperatures, spirits were high as everyone worked together. The day of the festival arrived, and the storm clouds loomed ominously overhead. Still, people bundled up in scarves and coats, determined to support the cause. The garden sparkled with fairy lights, and the air was filled with the enticing aroma of hot cocoa and baked goods. Children laughed as they played games, and adults mingled by the fire pits, exchanging stories and smiles. Clara moved through the crowd, overwhelmed by the turnout and the sense of togetherness. As the evening wore on, a sudden gust of wind sent a shiver through the festival. The first flakes of snow began to fall, light at first but quickly intensifying. Clara's heart sank as she realized the storm was arriving earlier than expected. She worried that the worsening weather would drive people away before they could raise enough funds. But to her surprise, no one seemed in a hurry to leave. Instead, the snow only added to the magic of the evening, with children catching snowflakes on their tongues and couples dancing beneath the falling white. Max took to the small stage set up in the corner of the garden, his breath visible in the chilly air. He grabbed the microphone, his voice strong and confident. Thank you all for coming tonight. Your support means everything to us and to the Haven. This place has given us so much, and now we have a chance to give back. Let's make sure it stays warm and welcoming for everyone who needs it. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the snowy night. Clara felt a swell of pride as she watched Max take charge, his passion and leadership shining brightly. By the end of the evening, the festival had raised more than enough money to replace the furnace. Clara couldn't hold back her tears as she counted the donations, overwhelmed by the community's generosity and love. She realized that the Haven was no longer just her dream, it had become a shared vision, nurtured and sustained by everyone who believed in its mission. The new furnace was installed the following week, just in time for the storm's peak. The Haven became a refuge for those seeking warmth and shelter.